Each news time, information is power. Be current. The news headline: Why Buhari's plan to replace subsidy with transport grants may be misleading. The news in full: The government will effectively be suspending one subsidy only to pay another. There is no guarantee it will deliver on its promise. For years, the Nigerian government has worked on eggshells in its moves to end the payment of fuel subsidy, often trapped between cutting costs and sparking public anger, and using cheaper fuel to keep its approval rating up. The government repeatedly adopted the latter despite the promises not to. Those in support of that policy says it helps lower the cost of living and supports millions of Nigerians who live below the poverty line. Still, critics such as the International Monetary Fund say subsidies constitute an unsustainable drain on public resources needed for critical developmental projects. The prices of diesel and kerosene have been largely deregulated, and retail prices at filling stations vary based on market forces, but petrol price is regulated. Nigerians typically use petrol to power their vehicles, tricycles, and motorcycles, and with erratic power supply, something they still grapple with. Millions rely on gasoline to power their generator sets. Between 2006 to 2018, Nigeria spent about 10 trillion naira on subsidies, a study supported by the British government estimated, more than the health, education, or defense budgets. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC) said Nigeria has already spent over 816 billion naira in the first 7 months of this year in subsidizing the cost of petrol. Propped by the newly passed Petroleum Industry Act, the Nigerian government has now set its sights on mid-2022 to fully remove fuel subsidy and move to a market-based pricing model. Washington-based IMF advised the government to hand out well-targeted social assistance to cushion any negative impact on the poor, particularly in light of still elevated inflation. To achieve this, the government said it will pay poor citizens 5,000 naira monthly as transport grants. The finance minister, Zainab Ahmed, said subject to the availability of resources and support from state governments, the handouts will target between 20 to 40 million Nigerians who make up the country's poorest population. The program is expected to run for 6 or 12 months, she said. Ahead of the target date of mid-22 for the complete elimination of fuel subsidies, we are working with our partners on measures to cushion potential negative impact of the removal of the subsidies on the most vulnerable at the bottom 40% of the population, Mrs. Ahmed said. One of such measures would be to institute a monthly transport subsidy in form of cash transfer of 5,000 naira to between 30 to 40 million deserving Nigerians, she added. When the numbers are considered, the plan appears bogus and seems a typical government design to mislead citizens. First, even for a year or 6 months, the transport grant option is quite expensive. Paying 40 million people 5,000 a year will cost the country 2.4 trillion naira, about 15% of the Nigerians' total budget in 2020. On the other hand, if subsidies are retained, the government would spend a lot less. Judging by Mrs. Ahmed's estimation that the subsidy cost as much as 150 billion monthly, petrol subsidy would stand at about 1.8 trillion a year. The grant option effectively means the government, even if temporarily, will be jettisoning one subsidy payment only for a more expensive one in a year. Its borrowing is expected on top 6 trillion naira. Some have described this as a miscalculation. Those in support of the grant idea argued that in a country where 4 in 10, a ratio reaching 9 in 10 in some states, live on less than 377 naira daily, the monthly grants would be significant to boost their purchasing power. Yet, either way, the government will not save for developmental projects, the reason at the center of its push to end subsidy. Second, The government spending style does not support its pretense about being committed to projects that truly serve the interest of the larger population. While Mrs. Ahmed has repeatedly argued that Nigeria has a revenue problem and not expenditure problem, Nigeria continues to run a big government despite its surging debt. Nigeria personal cost has continued to rise yearly despite the government not conducting major recruitment in 2022. The government hopes to spend 350 billion naira more on personal cost and 167 billion more on overheads than in 2021. Overhead cost related than in 2021. Overhead total 792.4 billion for 2022, meaning spending on overheads will surge by more than a quarter in the year ahead. Should the legislature actually go ahead to assent the appropriation bill, the National Assembly approved 3.76 trillion for personal costs. The combined overhead and personal expenses proposed for next year sum up to 4.9 trillion naira, 8.9% higher than Nigeria's entire budget of 4.5 trillion for 2015. These two expenditure categories also exceed the cash Africa's largest economy intends to commit to developmental projects in 2022, estimated at 4.89 trillion naira. In 2022, President Muhammadu Buhari's office will spend a whopping sum of 1.6 billion naira on new vehicles, the fourth largest by any government office since coming to power 6 years ago. The President's office has spent 5 billion on vehicles, enough to build 500 health centers at 10 million naira each. It has spent billions on food, uniforms, travels, a huge presidential air fleet, President's hospital, and more. The government may argue otherwise, but there is no guarantee subsidy savings will not be misapplied to financing other routine government administration that does not benefit the citizens. Also, despite Mrs. Ahmed's assurance to lawmakers last week that the government will make sure that the payments go rightful recipients by using biometric verification numbers, national identity cards, and bank account numbers, the absence of a verifiable database of potential beneficiary puts the efficiency of cash handouts in doubt and raises suspicion of financial mismanagement. As a cue, some have cited the lack of transparency that has shrouded social investment programs like trader money and conditional cash transfer, which have cost billions of naira. It will also be difficult to measure if the government has paid up to 20 million or 40 million people as it claims. In addition, the government's caveat about availability of resources makes it also potentially difficult to hold to its word if payments are not made. These payments are not sustainable because they are simply another consumption subsidy which are not productive in any way. A lead partner with SBM Intelligence Cheta Wanzi told Bloomberg, "I would have preferred